Hello and welcome to Ancient Biblical History. I'm Joy and I'm your host. Today is January 17th, 2023. And we are finishing up. This video is on a two-part series. This is the second part of that series. And we are having a discussion on and a lot of great images and imagery that is going to reflect some of these past and current cataclysms that the Bible has spoken about, that a lot of our ancient history throughout the world, going back in time, there's a lot of stories there, and I'm going to show you some great photos of some of this past history where we have melted structures and caused by a sun nova. We call them micronovas, and I'm going to also parallel that to what Scripture is telling us that's happened in past times with these worldwide floods throughout time and mass extinctions and other great things that are really going to open your mind up to what is happening in these current times with what we're seeing with the weather phenomena and the fires and the increase in the earthquakes. And all these are attributed to these magnetic pole changes. And one of the things that I've learned is that the magnetic pole is like a bar magnet, first of all. And the sun also has a magnetic north and south. And there is a comparison to, kind of like a simple bar magnet. And the sun's magnetic fields are currently on the move. And that is why we're seeing a lot of changes happening on the Earth, because they're very closely, NASA and they have other scientists that are closely monitoring the sun. A few years back, they launched another satellite closer to the sun to really be able to watch what's happening. And again, we're learning a lot of new things about the sun that back in time, looking back 20 years ago, we didn't know. And so, like everything else, this is part of a regular cycle, and they're called solar cycles. And each cycle is defined by periods of highs and low solar activity, and these are caused by movements of the magnetic field lines that extend out from the sun. And there's a lot of data collected by NASA and the SOHO spacecraft, which is also another satellite link that shows these migrating magnetic fields and lines that result in reversal of the sun's polarity, which ironically is what's happening here on the Earth as well. And these are all in sync, and all the stars out in the wide solar system, they all are on these same cycles. And, myself, I've studied this for the past 5 years. And I want to just kind of take you over to NASA and I'm going to show you some really cool stuff there, some imagery and things that they're talking about now. And I don't want you to really pay close attention to the dates that they give you because they're incorrect. And I want you to go with your own instincts. And I'm going to also put some video links on here where you can go and get the correct information regarding these polar reversals and also these micro sun novas that happen throughout the universe. So let's go over and take a look at some of this data on NASA's channel, first of all. And okay, let's go ahead and go over there. Okay, so here is the NASA website. And, not that long ago, they really weren't putting any information or data up on their site regarding these polar reversals, actually until just recently, as early as 2012, which I'm kind of on there right now. And where they talk about the Earth's magnetic field, and it can no longer be something that can be hidden from the public, the people of the world. More people are having a better understanding of how the magnetic field on the Earth changes its polarity, and which is why throughout time we've had a lot of changes in the geological record that go back millions of years, actually, showing that we've had these polar reversals. And they do that by ice core sampling, going to the North Pole and taking ice core samples from the south and also from the ocean floor, which there's a lot of data and recorded history there that they're able to capture, showing these magnetic field changes, which greatly affect the Earth and cause mass extinctions. And here they're telling us, NASA, that the Earth's magnetic field has flipped its polarity many times over the millennia. In other words, if you were alive 800,000 years ago, and again, don't pay too close attention to the timetables they're giving you. And yes, probably 8,000 years ago there was one, but there was also one 12,000 years ago, because that is a cycle that we're currently on, a 12,600 year cycle, which we are overdue in this lifetime that we're in now. So please keep that in mind, and it has nothing to do with greenhouse gases. I've mentioned this on my other videos. This has to do with what's happening with the magnetic poles and our sun. And I'll get more into that further in the video. So what I want to say is, finishing this little short briefing here in this paragraph, is it states that this is because the magnetic compass is collaborated based on the Earth's poles, north and south, basically marking a compass that would be 180 degrees wrong if the polarity of today's magnetic field were reversed. So in other words, that will cause a doomsday right here, as they say. And there's no such thing as theorist. In here, they use these kind of words to throw you off, throw the people off, so that people kind of look at this, well, this is something that may have happened thousands and thousands of years ago, if not millions of years ago, and we don't need to worry about that now. Wrong. Okay? Wrong. So, not that I'm trying to cause fear, I'm just trying to educate people, and I'm sure a lot of people are starting to feel these changes instinctively, as I myself personally started feeling some years back. And then I felt like God just opened my eyes up to a lot of this information, that I really started studying more and more. And it was like pieces of a puzzle fitting together. And, it's a bit of a wake-up call, but at the same time, there are people that obviously survive these. We know around the world there has been many, many underground cave systems that were built. Currently, we know in the U.S. the military has been really little busy bees building their underground bunkers and a network of tunnels. A lot of these tunnels were already in place, and I've talked about some of that in my past videos. And in the future, I'll talk more on that and kind of bring you up to date on some of these tunnel systems and where people can go to be safe. Anyway, it says here that the occurrence suggests that it could lead to the Earth's destruction. Okay, but the answer from the geological fossil records is that hundreds of past magnetic polarity reversals seems to be no. No, not a total Earth destruction, but very close to it, more like a mass extinction. So if you go back in geological time, you look at the time records, and you see what happens, which I have showed pictures of. Let's go there now. And let's look at some of these photos here of some of these animals that went extinct. Not just the dinosaurs, but all through time, you have these different periods of time of these animals and civilizations as well, including a time when there were giants, as the Bible has spoken about, living here on the earth. But we know we have layers and layers of animals and different species of animals, like this little colt that is 800,000 years old. This bull, mammoth, this baby cub, it was flash frozen. And you have to ask yourself, how did these animals get flash frozen? And how did some of them that are 1,000,000 years old, let's say, or 800,000 years old, how did they get layered on top of a more recent polar reversal or layer of muck, which is frozen ground that's thawing now? So you have to ask yourself, how come those aren't buried deeper and not closer to the surface? Well, because if there was something major, an upheaval that happened where the Earth's crust has shifted and all these things were uplifted and then moved as the Earth is shifting to a different part of the Earth and then refrozen and buried again, well, that explains it. And I'm going to tell you exactly how that happens. So let's go look at some more of these structures now that reflect what damage the sun can actually do during these polar reversals. And here we're looking at some ancient ruins, and this was clearly some structures made out of brick, so they couldn't have been too far off in the past. Probably, I would say, during the last cycle. These structures obviously were hit by something of high heat, because you see the melting of this brick. And this here is over in Central Asia. Then we go to other parts of the planet, and over in Turkey you have Göbekli Tepe, which was clearly covered. These ruins, this was actually an archaeological find that was 10 years ago when they discovered these ruins, and up on a mount over in Turkey, and on top of a hill they found hundreds of these circular structures that were megalithic in size. And I've talked about these in some of my previous videos, and you can go back and look through those and be brought up to date on this particular part that I'm speaking about in Göbekli Tepe. But these were buried by some type of cataclysm, and there is some controversy that they were purposely covered up by the people. But these structures here go back during the last ice age. Approximately 12,000 years ago is how they carbon dated these, because they found other artifacts buried alongside some of the stone structures, where they were able to tell the actual date or close to it. So we know that these were built during the last ice age. So clearly there was something catastrophic that had happened that caused these to be buried. Even in Rome, you're seeing structures. I mean, these were clearly a lot larger, but there was something catastrophic that went through here, and destroyed a lot of these megalithic buildings and structures that you're looking at. These are huge. I mean, the people look like little ants walking down there on the roadway. So you could clearly see how magnificent and how large these structures were. And it would take something pretty powerful to bring these down. They weren't, and if you look at some of the other ruins that, have damage that were buried. Obviously, these were, too large to be buried by soot and mud and everything else that probably covered the entire Earth, as the water during a polar reversal would obviously cause water to come up over the continents, which is why we have mountains and other structures that are perpendicular, where you could see that the mountains are all facing in a westerly direction. So that's all over the planet. And here we could see these almost look like, which they would, obviously they would like to tell us a false narrative that, oh, the Indians, or ancient people dug these little windows out, to live in inside these rocks. No, this is clearly a structure that had melted. So to cause solid granite or rock of this type to melt, you could see that these were buildings at one time. I don't think they were brick. I think at the bottom you can see maybe a little bit of brick, but it's hard to say. I don't think they were brick, but clearly they were some sort of structure that was hit by a sun outburst, a sun nova, a micronova. That is the closest heat source that would cause this kind of damage. Not a comet, not an asteroid. Those can do some significant damage, but they are not going to do it on a time, a cycle like what we're seeing. Those would be something that would happen periodically throughout time, but you're not going to see cycles, every 12,000 years, let's say. So, again, this is in, I think, Mesopotamia here. And you have to ask yourself, how did these structures, they're digging down into the layers of sediment and uncovering these different civilizations that were, buried on top of each other. You have to ask yourself, what buried them in the first place? It certainly wasn't just over a time period and, dirt blew over them. I mean, and another civilization came along and, built their structures on top of them. These go way down deep. And even in Mesopotamia, when they unearthed a lot of those megalithic structures there in Nippur, some almost the size of a smaller pyramid that you would see in Egypt, to be completely buried, you're just not going to see, a record of time being able to do that. It would have to be some kind of upheaval, some kind of upheaval of landmass coming over the structures, such as a worldwide flood. Now, here is another one. This one's in Asia. You could clearly see that this is was once a building that completely melted. And back in time, when you're going back to the last ice age, during that time frame, most of the megalithic sites that we see were built of stone, and that's the way they built their structures. And they had the technology to do that. And we've had intervals in between that, dating back maybe 3,000, 4,000 years ago, where you see the buildings being more creative and more magnificent, smaller in size, of course, but just more ornate, and you could see that the civilizations, closer to maybe the 15th century, were more highly advanced in technology. And we'll talk about that later in another video. But, here's some more structures, dating back to, again, the last ice age, going back 12,000 years ago, where these were just completely melted. And the only type of heat that can do that, it wouldn't be a volcano. To melt brick would have to be a significant high amount of heat that would just totally melt a structure made of stone or brick. So let's go look at some other images of some of the other parts of the earth that were actually covered, maybe not this, totally melted, but covered in sediments We call those mud flooded structures, which even here where I live, I found some old images where we could clearly see, that there was some flooding that had taken place and covered a lot of the structures. Now, during a polar reversal, I want you to keep in mind that there's two different polar reversals. We have one on a 12,000 year cycle, which will totally cause the Earth to stop its rotation altogether, and it actually will rotate in an opposite direction. And there's scientific evidence of that, and NASA talks about that as well. And then there's also one that's still a polar reversal, but where the poles don't completely flip their polarity, kind of like what we see on the sun. And you see these magnetic explosions that are happening when these sunspots appear on the sun, and you see the gamma rays leaving the sun, and most of them don't hit the Earth, but if they did, they can cause a lot of things to happen here, where that's where we see an increase maybe in earthquakes and even volcanism. We see a lot of that happening. And there's just so many things that are affected by what the sun is doing that affects what's happening here on Earth. And obviously the sun is ramping up because we see what's happening with the tornadoes, the increase in volcanoes and earthquakes and flooding and fires. And so let's go take a look at some of that. And I want to kind of show you what gamma rays, and this goes to show you what gamma rays can do, which are kind of like microwaves, basically, that come from the sun when the magnetosphere is weakening, and what that looks like with dry lightning. If you want to know how these fires, it's not because of drought. Clearly it's not. It's caused by this dry lightning, and I just want to show you some images of that. So first of all, this is a map from 2021 or 2021 that I downloaded that shows, some of the current wildfires, because that was a really busy wildfire season. And you could see clearly from looking at this map where all these fires were hitting. They were everywhere. They were all over the Earth, pretty much on every continent. They were facing fires or flooding. But we'll just focus here on the West Coast, where we had all these different fires happening. And some of these, like up in Oregon, there was no drought. Seattle and Montana, those are really wet. They get a lot of snow there, a lot of rain. Those are colder areas. They typically don't get drought. So get that out of your mind. I want you just to think about what's really happening here. Now, dry lightning, this image here, first of all, is from a Southern California fire. And what a gamma ray will do, like a microwave, as you could see, the lawns are still green. The trees were not really burned, but yet the structures and even the cars, the metal cars, are burnt to almost a powder-like substance. Even porcelain bathtubs and toilets were melted, completely disintegrated pretty much. And yet a lot of the shrubbery and the surrounding trees and areas where you see green were not affected. You might see some singeing and burning, but not anything like the actual structures. And that's what a microwave will do. Now, whether that was something man-made or clearly, from dry lightning remains to be told. But I do know that we're in a current polar reversal, and I know our magnetic north has moved, and it's on the move. We've lost almost 30%. So I do know that the gamma rays are bombarding the atmosphere, and they are getting through, and they are causing dry lightning, and I'll show you what that looks like. And again, that's what we're seeing here. You see the trees and the grass is still green, but yet the structures are burnt to a crisp, almost a powder-like substance. And this is what dry lightning looks like. It burns from the inside out. Now, that's clearly Now, don't get this confused with lightning itself. Dry lightning is a little bit different. It's caused from a gamma ray, which is what bombards the Earth. That's what our magnetic field protects the Earth from. And that's why it's so important. And as that starts weakening, which it is now, this is what is getting through from the solar output of our sun. And it clearly burns from the inside out. And this is some more. These were some images that were, taken by NASA. And fire-breathing dragon clouds is what they call it. But this is clearly gamma rays from the sun's output getting through the atmosphere. And again, another shot. So that's what I kind of wanted to help you understand, that there is a big difference, and it's not because of drought, because we're not getting enough rain. And, we've had, even here in California, we've had, years of where I recall there being a lot of rain, and they were still, saying, oh, it's drought, and the government, they put whatever they want to say, whatever they think that's going to feed the public, what they want them to hear, even though it's all a lie. Even our history, which is what I've been speaking about in a lot of my videos, is a total lie. And, it was something concocted by these governments of the world, these powerful people in high places, like the Bible talks about, it's principalities and spirits in high places, in heavenly places even. So let's go and look at some other images. And what I want to do is take you through, and anybody can go look this up. These are some structures here. Let's just pull some of these up here to give you an idea of what we call a mud flood building, so you know what you're looking at. This is a structure, as you can see, that had a total refacading, is what we call it, where at one time this whole structure was buried and then, unburied again. And you can see where, there was mud, debris, dirt that obviously covered part of the structure. No one's going to build a structure and cover the windows after they build it. And I even see this where I live, here in California, Central California, the town I live in, and I see it everywhere now. And there's so many of these types of buildings all over, here's some more, all over the planet, in Russia and Asia, where you can clearly see that there was some flooding that had taken place, and probably even more of the structures after a flood. Let's say, I don't even think it was probably that long ago. It's just hard to date these, but nevertheless, we know that there was a worldwide flood not that long ago, and probably, I would say, guessing around the 15th century, something happened. And that's where we see a new reset happening and a big cover-up, where we see people migrating to the Americas, and we were given the fake story of the Christopher Columbus founding America. And then all of a sudden, all these structures are all founded, in the 1800s, and they have these world fairs going on and great fires happening, every one of them burnt to the ground. And it's a way to get rid of and cover up a lot of the structures that had clearly already been here, primarily in the United States. And there just wasn't, a bunch of Indians and teepees here. There were structures, castles, huge buildings, made out of millions and millions of bricks, star forts, which I've talked about in a lot of my videos. And this is a good example. Nobody is going to build a building like this and then cover the bottom section up with windows. But let's say if there was a flood that came through here, where there was a polar shift, let's say, and waters came over the continents, what would it do? It would cover a lot of these buildings in mud and water. So as the water starts drying up and receding, you still probably have a lot of mud there and a lot of unburying, digging these structures out. And some of them, they probably didn't dig all the way out, which is why we see half of them still buried, and they completely put sidewalks and, cement right over the windows. And let's see, let's look at some more here. This is a good one here. You look at this image, and clearly you could see this was all covered, half of the actual structure and solid brick. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of these underground tunnels. We're seeing a lot of man-made brick, where these were, probably that's where a lot of the past civilizations took cover. They had tunnels everywhere, all connecting all over the planet, which they still do, and the government obviously has access to a lot of that. And we're seeing a lot of the same architect, and again, you need to go and look at watch some of my videos that talk about a lot of the star forts and other structures that were completely refacaded and buried during a time of a cataclysm that happened in the not so near past, or not so near future, I want to say. But these are just everywhere, all over the earth. We're seeing structures, some of them going back in ancient times, some of them more recent, but we're clearly seeing cataclysms that have happened over and over again throughout time, just like what we're seeing now. Structures that are, places where they're burning things, pulverizing it. Other places being flooded, like what we're seeing here in this image. You're seeing a lot of megalithic, beautiful structures that are clearly ancient and megalithic, probably during the time of giants that were here on the earth throughout time. And we have different periods of giants, some, going the further back in time, obviously the more massive they were and taller in stature. And then as time progresses, we're still seeing giants through the different civilizations, maybe 12 footers, 14 footers, and then, closer to our time period, then, we're looking at 10, 8 feet tall. And I have a lot of images and other videos that I have also shared with you, showing real images from the 18th century. And a lot of them were Tartarian civilizations that I believe are responsible for building a lot of these beautiful structures that were here, primarily actually in Russia and China and the U.S. And, they just weren't teepees here. There were beautiful structures like what you would see in ancient Rome or something. Beautifully built domes, cathedrals. They had electricity. They were obviously gathering that from the ether, and there was a lot of antiquitech that were on all these buildings. And then they just repurposed everything. Whoever these people are that come out probably from underground and restart civilization and reintroduce orphan kids, which are easy to reprogram if you're looking to change the history and cover all this up, and obviously make people your slaves and have them doing all your work for you as you're reaping the benefits of owning all this new inherited buildings and castles and land and gold and everything else that had been covered by a more recent catastrophe or a past catastrophe. So I usually keep my video presentations, I can go on and on about this, to an hour. I don't want to go over, and I've probably went more than I should, but there's going to be so much more that I'm going to be sharing with you. This, we're just getting into this, and, these cataclysms, and, I've studied this for the past 5 years, so there's just a lot of information that I've learned, and I'll put a couple links up where you can go and see some really great presentations from Doug Diehold is one. He's a physicist, and he's studied these magnetic fields in depth. He's someone that's reliable, that's educated. He's the one that talks a lot about the sun novas and these micronovas that happen with every star in the universe. People think a nova is an explosion of a star, and the star's gone. It turns into, a ball of white light. Well, that's not true. It forms a dust cloud. It blasts off the outer shell, but it doesn't burn up. It's still there, and it starts its cycle over again. But and that's what our sun does. Ours is relatively small, and when it blasts off its shell, the outer crust of its magnetic field, it obviously has a great effect on our atmosphere and our magnetosphere, and also the other planets. But the recovery time isn't as long as what some of the larger stars and damage that they do. And that's, it's like God's got our back. And the Bible talks about, there's so many passages that I'll later get into that parallels everything that I'm sharing with you now in Scripture, including the fact that, the heavens rolled up like a scroll, the moon turned red. Why would the moon turn red? Well, if the moon got blasted first, the people here on Earth, because it would take at least 7-8 hours before that dust shell would hit the Earth, so the moon would get blasted first, and obviously it would get baked and it would turn red. And that's why they found a lot of that green glass when they went to the moon, and a lot of large pieces of it, because it took a brunt of the dust shell. It's closest to the sun when that blasted. So that's why they found a lot of those glass-like substances, minerals and things that the sun lets off, including gold, which we know. How do you think gold gets here to the planet? And, it wasn't already here. It comes from these micronovas. A lot of other minerals and things that blast off from the sun as well. So anyway, I'm going to close this video presentation up. I thank you. I love you, and please give me a thumbs up if you like my videos, and we will see you during the next video presentation in approximately 2 weeks. I'll try to keep that on a consistent time frame. So I'm trying to get these videos out at least one every 2 weeks. So until then, thank you, and God bless.